How to win in dentistry in 2021. Hi everyone, Angus Pryor here, number one Google ranked dental marketer and practice growth specialist. I've got a special guest for you today. Welcome, Dr. Jessie Green.
Hello, Angus. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Jessie, I could say you need no introduction, but it's inevitable that some people have not come across you before. So you're a dentist. You're still practicing dentistry?
I still own a practice. Okay. I do a little bit of dentistry from time to time, but not as much as I used to.
Yeah, and so now you're spending your time, and I think this topic is completely apt for you, helping dentists to run better practices in simple terms. Is that be wrong?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And really, it's about helping them run a business that produces more cash flow, gives them more time, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's what we do.
Awesome. Well, when we talk about how to win in dentistry in 2021, of course, you know, one of the marvelous things about being in business is that the landscape changes. 2020 is the year we will never forget. Let's start with a fairly broad one. For a dentist that's thinking, okay, you know, what do I need to do in 2021? Because here are the facts. I mean, every year, dentistry is becoming more competitive. That's just a statistical fact. The number of dentists joining the marketplace is growing faster than the Australian population is growing. In fact, something like 2 to 2.5 times faster. Just kind of, let's start with a kind of big picture. What are the sorts of things, the pillars, if you like, that dentists should be focusing on?
Well, there's a number of pillars, Angus, and I guess, you know, like anything, it's like, which is your favorite child? They're all important. And it's how they...
grandchildren, and you're really in trouble.
Yeah, then you're in all sorts of strife, mate. It's just not worth the arguments. Yeah. But I guess all the pillars are important, but some might be more important to different people at different stages of their journey. So I'll list a few of them off. Obviously, being intelligent around your numbers and your finance is going to be key. Managing cash flow, generating cash flow, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be able to build and lead a great team. We would refer to that as a self-managing team. That's going to require leadership and so on and so forth. Marketing, which is obviously something that, you know, is your bread and butter. Being able to attract patients, retain patients, reactivate patients is, you know, going to be key to having full books. Case presentation. I like to use the word sales because for me, you know, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. So whether you use sales or case presentation, in essence, it's about being able to offer treatment that's appropriate and relevant for that patient and have them accepted. And then beyond that, it's, you know, operations and systems and, you know, the structures that go into the business, using data around that to make decisions. And, you know, those would be the big ones that I think. But having a plan above all that, you know, if we think about what sits above that, it's about being strategic and thinking about, you know, if I'm going to win in 2021, I want to be intentional about that, and I want to have a plan about what I want to achieve and how I'm going to go about that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, Jessie, the truth is, everyone, I went to school with Jessie's wife, so we've got a bit of a connection there. But, you know, if I think about dentistry 20 years ago, it was kind of open up a practice. I was actually talking to someone today who had opened their first practice within 3 months of graduating. And it was pretty much graduate, get a lease, get a fit out, put out your welcome mat, and then kind of Bob's your uncle, you know, like in only a matter of time, you'd be booked weeks in advance. But I would say in almost everywhere in Australia, those days are gone. Look, of the list that you mentioned, there's a couple that I want to pick on. The first one is leadership, because I agree with you, that is super important. And I just wondered, you know, I'm not here to bag the listeners, but I have to say, I think that leadership is an area that a lot of dental practices struggle with. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a really good reason for it. And it's because for the most part, we spend 5 years at university being taught clinical things. You know, we learn how to, you know, do a great restoration. We focus on our margins. We focus on our anatomy of our restorations, crown and bridge, you know, endo, all those technical skills. And nowhere in the 5-year degree, at least when I was at uni, I don't think it's changed since, is there a single lecture on leadership or building a team And so if you're not trained to do that, you learn by osmosis, or you learn through the school of hard knocks, or you make an intentional decision to go and learn elsewhere around that. So I think it's probably understandable that dentists are perhaps a little deficient in that area when they first get into practice ownership, and they've got to really kind of get up to speed with that because they've not been taught it. I think that's probably the main thing.
It's interesting. I was at a practice once where the owner of the practice literally said to me, and I was a sort of a consultant coming in to help them do some work, Angus, could you get so-and-so to do such and such? And I found myself thinking, I'm sorry, whose name's on the door here? Like, but, you know, I mean, that's partly, I suppose, a kind of a leadership gap, and I suppose partly maybe not wanting to have an awkward conversation, although it wasn't a particularly, you know, I didn't have to tell them to dress more appropriately or anything. It was something I thought was fairly routine, but I was staggered that I was being asked to effectively be a kind of a manager in a practice.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, a lot of people when they run a business, and dentistry, you know, certainly falls into this case, but it's not limited to dentistry in my view. And the number one frustration that lots of practice owners talk about is team. And, you know, why won't they, or why can't they, or why haven't they, you know, done whatever it is. And so I think it's a really common frustration. I think one of the things that as leaders we need to understand is, you know, firstly, we've got to be able to lead ourselves. And, you know, we talk about primary, tertiary, and secondary leadership, and primary leadership is about, you know, leading yourself, becoming the best person that you can be. And, you know, leading a team, of course, is secondary leadership, where you're leading a small team. But tertiary leadership is about developing other leaders. And so I think as your practice goes through different stages of growth, the levels of leadership and the skills of leadership, you know, increase throughout the journey. So it all begins though with being able to lead yourself. And in that situation you just described, as perhaps having the courage to have that conversation and trying to understand why they're not comfortable to have that conversation, becoming more comfortable, or learning how to have a conversation of that nature. So, you know, baby steps and then bigger steps and then leaps is kind of the journey I think leadership kind of takes.
There's a book by management guru Peter Drucker, Managing Oneself, I think it's called. It's a favourite of mine, not least of which because it's about that thick. It's something you could read in about, honestly, half an hour. But one of the things that he says in that I think is really interesting, because I think we do need to know ourselves to be, you know, as you say, to lead ourselves. And one of the things that I found very helpful from that book is he said, every time you make a big decision, write it on your calendar in 9 months' time about what you think is going to happen. And then, of course, the pop-up pops up in your calendar and you see how you go versus how you think you are. And I know for me, one of the things I learned quite early on is that I was a bit too optimistic. You know, every time I started something new, I'd say, oh, yeah, we're going to achieve this outcome and so on. And the reality was quite a bit less. So that managing oneself, leading oneself is really important.